When Rebecca Chen answered a simple advertisement for a ranch cook in 1867 Nebraska Territory, she thought she was just seeking steady work and a place to belong. But as her warm meals began melting the walls around Marcus Kane's guarded heart, she discovered that sometimes the most unexpected recipes are the ones that transform two lonely souls into something neither could have imagined alone. Could a woman who came looking for employment end up finding the home she'd been searching for all her life? The morning air bit like a hungry wolf as Rebecca Chen stepped off the dusty stagecoach in Millbrook, Nebraska Territory. September 1867 had painted the endless grasslands the color of old gold, and the wind carried whispers of the harsh winter that would soon grip this wild land. Her small bag felt heavier than it should have, weighed down not just with her few belongings, but with the hope that this remote frontier town might finally offer her a fresh start. Behind her, the stagecoach driver was already unloading mail and supplies, eager to continue his route before the weather turned. Rebecca pulled her worn shawl tighter and studied the collection of wooden buildings that made up Millbrook's main street. The town looked like it had been dropped onto the prairie by accident. A few stores, a church with a crooked steeple, and maybe 30 houses scattered around like dice thrown by a careless gambler. "You getting off here, miss?" the driver called, wiping sweat from his forehead despite the cool air. "Yes, thank you." Rebecca's voice came out smaller than she intended. She cleared her throat and tried again. "Could you tell me where I might find the general store?" The man pointed to a building with a hand-painted sign that read, "Henley's General Store," in faded blue letters. "Right there. Old Henley knows everybody's business in these parts. If you're looking for work or family, he's your man." Work. The word sent a flutter of nervousness through Rebecca's stomach. She had seen the advertisement in the Omaha Herald 3 weeks ago. Cook wanted for working ranch. Must be capable and reliable. Inquire at Millbrook General Store. The notice had been brief, but it promised steady pay and a place to live. After months of scraping by in boarding houses where landlords looked at her with suspicion, the idea of steady work felt like finding water in a desert. She walked toward the general store, her boots clicking on the wooden sidewalk. Through dusty windows, she could see shelves lined with goods, barrels of flour, bolts of fabric, tools hanging from hooks on the walls. The smell of tobacco and leather drifted from the open door, mixed with something else she couldn't name. Coffee, maybe, or the lingering scent of bacon from someone's breakfast. The bell above the door chimed as she entered, and conversation stopped. 3 men standing near the counter turned to look at her, their eyes curious but not unkind. In a territory where new faces were rare, especially female faces, Rebecca had grown used to being studied like an interesting puzzle. "Help you, miss?" The man behind the counter had a thick gray beard and kind eyes that crinkled at the corners. His apron was stained with what looked like molasses, and his sleeves were rolled up to reveal arms that had seen decades of hard work. "I'm looking for Mr. Henley," Rebecca said, stepping closer to the counter. "About the cooking position." "That'd be me. John Henley." He extended a hand that engulfed hers completely. "You must be the young lady who sent the letter." Rebecca nodded. She had written to inquire about the job 2 weeks ago, though she hadn't been sure her letter would even reach this remote place. "Yes, sir." Rebecca Chen. "Well, Miss Chen, you're in luck. The man you need to see is right outside." Henley nodded toward the window where a tall figure was bent over a wagon wheel, examining it with the careful attention of someone who understood that broken equipment could mean the difference between success and failure on the frontier. Rebecca moved closer to the window and watched the man work. He wasn't what she had expected from a ranch owner. Most of the cattlemen she had encountered were rough, loud men who seemed to take up more space than their bodies actually required. This man moved with quiet purpose, his dark hair catching the morning sunlight as he tested the wheel with gentle pressure. When he straightened and turned toward the store, she noticed he favored his left leg slightly, as if an old injury still caused him pain. "That's Marcus Kane," Henley said, joining her at the window. "Owns the Double K Ranch about 8 miles north of town. Good man, but he's had some hard luck lately." "What kind of hard luck?" Rebecca asked, though she wasn't sure she should be asking such personal questions. Henley glanced around to make sure the other customers weren't listening, then lowered his voice. Lost his cook about a month ago. Woman just up and left one morning. Didn't even give notice. Then he had to let half his ranch hands go because he couldn't feed them proper. A working man needs good food, and Marcus was trying to cook for them himself. But he shook his head. Man's got many talents, but cooking ain't one of them. The bell chimed again as Marcus Kane pushed through the door, bringing with him the sense of leather, horse, and open sky. Up close, Rebecca could see that his eyes were the color of storm clouds, gray with flecks of darker blue. His face was weathered from years of outdoor work, but there was something in his expression that suggested intelligence and careful thought. "Morning, John," he said to Henley. Then his gaze moved to Rebecca. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Rebecca felt as if she were being measured, though not in an unfriendly way. "This is Miss Chen," Henley said, breaking the silence. "She's here about the cooking position." Marcus Kane's eyes dropped to the small bag at Rebecca's feet, then back to her face. "You're here about the job." It wasn't a question, but Rebecca nodded anyway. "Yes, sir. I saw your advertisement in the Omaha paper. Can you cook for working men? Hot meals, 3 times a day, starting before dawn." The directness of the question caught Rebecca off guard, but she appreciated it. She had grown tired of conversations that danced around important topics. "I can cook for 20 men if needed, Mr. Kane. I've worked in hotel kitchens and boarding houses. I know how to stretch ingredients and make filling meals from simple foods." Something flickered in Marcus Kane's expression. Surprise, maybe, or relief. "The job pays $50 a month, plus room and board. You'd have your own room in the main house, and you'd eat the same food as everyone else. Work starts at dawn and ends after supper cleanup." $50 a month was more than Rebecca had hoped for. In San Francisco, she had been lucky to earn $30 working in a restaurant kitchen where the owner treated her like she should be grateful for any work at all. "That sounds fair, Mr. Kane." "Good." He turned as if to leave, then paused and looked back at her. "Bring warm clothes. Winter comes early out here and it stays late. You'll need to be tough to make it through." As he walked out of the store, Rebecca felt a strange mixture of excitement and nervousness settling in her chest. She had gotten the job, but she sensed that working for Marcus Kane might be more complicated than simply cooking meals for hungry ranch hands. "When does he want me to start?" she called after him. Marcus Kane paused in the doorway, his hand on the frame. "Tomorrow morning. I'll pick you up at first light." The wagon ride to the Double K ranch began in darkness so complete that Rebecca could barely see Marcus Kane sitting beside her on the wooden seat. The only sounds were the steady clip-clop of horse hooves, the creak of wagon wheels, and the whisper of wind through grass that stretched endlessly in all directions. As the sun began to paint the eastern horizon with streaks of pink and gold, the landscape revealed itself slowly, like a photograph developing in a photographer's dark room. Rolling hills covered in prairie grass that moved like ocean waves, dotted with clusters of trees that marked creek beds and draws. In the distance, a line of darker vegetation suggested a river, and beyond that, the land seemed to go on forever. "How long have you owned the ranch?" Rebecca asked, partly to break the comfortable silence and partly because she was genuinely curious about this quiet man who had hired her with so few questions. Marcus Kane was quiet for so long that Rebecca wondered if he had heard her. Then he spoke, his voice low and thoughtful. 5 years. Built it from nothing after I came back from the war." The way he said "came back" suggested there was more to that story, but Rebecca didn't push. She had learned that frontier people shared their histories when they were ready, and not before. "Were you in the army long?" she ventured. "Long enough." His hand moved unconsciously to touch his left leg, the one he favored when he walked. "Saw some battles that changed how I looked at things. When I got out, I wanted to build something peaceful, something that would last." Rebecca studied his profile as he spoke. There were lines around his eyes that suggested he had seen more than his share of hardship, but there was also something solid about him, like a man who had found his place in the world even if the journey to get there had been difficult. "The previous cook," Rebecca said carefully. "Mr. Henley mentioned she left suddenly." Marcus Kane's jaw tightened slightly. Martha had been with us for 2 years. Good cook, reliable worker. Then one morning I went to start the coffee and found a note saying she was leaving to get married. Didn't even say goodbye to the men. That must have been difficult. More than difficult. By the time I realized I couldn't handle the cooking myself, I'd already lost 4 good ranch hands. Men need proper food to do hard work, and I was serving them burned biscuits and stew that tasted like leather. He glanced at Rebecca. That's why I was so quick to hire you. I can't afford to lose any more good men. The honesty in his voice surprised Rebecca. Most employers she had worked for acted as if they were doing her a favor by giving her a job. Marcus Kane spoke as if he understood that good help was valuable and that keeping employees required treating them well. I won't leave without notice, Rebecca said quietly. I know what it's like to depend on work to survive. Something in her tone made Marcus Kane look at her more carefully. You've had hard times. It wasn't a question, but Rebecca nodded anyway. My husband died in a mining accident in California 2 years ago. His family made it clear that I wasn't welcome to stay, so I've been working my way east, looking for a place where I could make a fresh start. I'm sorry for your loss. The simple words, spoken without elaborate sympathy or awkward attempts at comfort, meant more to Rebecca than all the flowery condolences she had received from people who barely knew her. Thank you. They rode in silence for a while, each lost in their own thoughts. The sun was fully up now, warming the air and bringing out the rich sense of grass and earth and growing things. Rebecca found herself relaxing for the first time in months. There was something peaceful about this vast landscape, something that made her feel like she could breathe deeply again. There it is, Marcus Kane said, pointing ahead to where buildings had appeared on the horizon like a mirage solidifying into reality. The Double K Ranch looked like it had grown out of the prairie itself. The main house was built of logs that had weathered to a soft gray, with a wide porch that faced east to catch the morning sun. Behind it stood a barn that could hold dozens of horses and cattle, and beyond that, a long, low building that Rebecca guessed was the bunkhouse where the ranch hands lived. What struck her most was how organized everything looked. Fences were straight and well-maintained, tools were stored neatly under shed roofs, and even the corrals were built with careful attention to both function and appearance. This was the work of a man who took pride in what he had built. It's beautiful, Rebecca said, and she meant it. Marcus Kane looked surprised by the compliment. It's been a lot of work. Some days I wonder if I bit off more than I could chew, trying to build a ranch this size with just a few hands. As they pulled into the yard, Rebecca noticed movement in the barn men beginning their morning chores, preparing for another day of the endless work that kept a ranch running. One of them, an older man with silver hair and a mustache, looked up as the wagon approached and raised his hand in greeting. That's Pete Morrison, my foreman, Marcus Kane said. Been with me since the beginning. If you have questions about how things work around here, Pete's the man to ask. Rebecca nodded, filing away the information. In her experience, the key to succeeding in a new job was learning quickly who could help her and who might cause problems. Pete Morrison's friendly wave suggested he fell into the helpful category. Marcus Kane pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the main house and climbed down, then offered Rebecca his hand to help her down. His grip was firm and steady, and for just a moment, Rebecca felt a flutter of something she couldn't quite name: awareness. Maybe, of how long it had been since anyone had treated her with such simple courtesy. Kitchen's through the front door and to the left, he said, shouldering her bag without being asked. Your room is upstairs, second door on the right. The men eat at 6, noon and 6 again. Nothing fancy required, just good, filling food. Rebecca followed him up the porch steps and through a front door that opened into a main room furnished with sturdy, practical furniture. Everything was clean but had the slightly empty feel of a house where no woman lived. Through an archway to the left, she could see into the kitchen, and her heart sank a little at what she saw there. The kitchen was large enough, with a massive cast-iron stove that could easily cook for a dozen men and shelves that could hold plenty of supplies. But dirty dishes were stacked everywhere. The floor needed sweeping, and a thin layer of dust covered every surface. This was the kitchen of a man who had been trying to cook but had no idea how to maintain a proper workspace. I know it's not much to look at right now, Marcus Kane said, following her gaze. But it's got everything you need once you get it organized. Rebecca set down her small bag and rolled up her sleeves. It'll be fine once I get it cleaned up. What supplies do you have? Marcus Kane looked relieved that she wasn't complaining about the state of the kitchen. Plenty of flour, beans, salt pork, some canned goods. Pete usually rides to town once a week for fresh supplies, vegetables, meat when we're not butchering our own beef. Good. Rebecca was already moving around the kitchen, opening cupboards and assessing what she had to work with. I can have a proper supper ready by 6 tonight. You don't need to start today. Take time to get settled. Rebecca looked at him with surprise. Mr. Kane, you hired me to cook. That's what I intend to do. For the first time since she had met him, Marcus Kane smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes and transformed his entire face. In that case, Miss Chen, welcome to the Double K Ranch. As he left her alone in the kitchen, Rebecca stood for a moment in the quiet space, feeling something she hadn't experienced in a very long time. For the first time since her husband's death, she felt like she might truly be home. But first, she had a kitchen to clean and 6 hungry men to feed, and she intended to show Marcus Kane that hiring her was the best decision he had made in a long time. The crash of breaking dishes echoed through the kitchen like thunder, followed by a string of words that would have made a preacher blush. Rebecca had been scrubbing the massive cast-iron stove when the stack of plates she had carefully balanced on the counter decided to make their escape to the floor. Are you hurt? Marcus Kane's voice came from the doorway, where he stood with concern written across his weathered features. Rebecca knelt among the scattered pieces of what had once been the ranch's everyday dishes, her cheeks burning with embarrassment. I'm fine, just clumsy. I'm so sorry about the plates. Don't worry about them. They were cracked anyway. Marcus stepped into the kitchen, careful not to tread on the broken pieces. Here, let me help you clean this up. As they worked together to sweep up the mess, Rebecca became aware of how close Marcus was kneeling beside her. She could smell the scent of leather and soap that seemed to follow him everywhere, and when their hands accidentally touched while reaching for the same piece of broken china, she felt a jolt of electricity that had nothing to do with the dry prairie air. There, Marcus said, dumping the last of the broken dishes into a waste bucket. No harm done. But Rebecca barely heard him. Her attention had been caught by something far more interesting than broken plates. While kneeling to clean up the mess, she had spotted a loose floorboard near the back wall of the kitchen, and unless her eyes were playing tricks on her, there was something hidden underneath it. Mr. Kane, she said carefully, this floorboard looks loose. Should I be worried about the foundation? Marcus followed her gaze and his expression changed completely. The easy smile vanished, replaced by something that looked almost like fear. That's nothing to worry about. Just old wood settling. But Rebecca had grown up in a household where hiding places were necessary for survival. She recognized the signs of a deliberate hiding spot when she saw one. The question was, what was Marcus Kane hiding? And why did the sight of that loose board make him look like he had seen a ghost? I should check my supplies, Rebecca said, deciding not to push the matter. Figure out what I need from town. Marcus nodded, clearly relieved to change the subject. Pete usually makes the supply run on Saturdays. You can give him a list. As he left the kitchen, Rebecca found herself staring at that loose floorboard. In her experience, people hid things for 2 reasons. Either the hidden item was very valuable or it was very dangerous. Either way, she was now working in a house that held secrets, and that made her more curious than she cared to admit. The morning passed quickly as Rebecca threw herself into the task of transforming the neglected kitchen into a proper workspace. She scrubbed surfaces until they gleamed, organized supplies with military precision, and took inventory of everything from flour sacks to coffee beans. By noon, the kitchen looked like a completely different room. It was while she was washing the final batch of pots that she heard voices outside, men talking in the urgent, hushed tones that usually meant trouble. Rebecca dried her hands and moved to the window, where she could see Pete Morrison and 2 other ranch hands gathered near the barn, their faces serious. Lost another 3 head last night, Pete was saying to Marcus, who had just joined the group. Found tracks leading north toward Crow's Ridge. Marcus's face darkened. Same tracks as before? Looks like it. Whoever's taking our cattle knows what they're doing. They're not leaving much of a trail. Rebecca felt a chill that had nothing to do with the autumn air. Cattle theft was a serious crime on the frontier, and it could ruin a ranch if it continued. She thought about Marcus's earlier comment about losing ranch hands because he couldn't afford to keep them. If someone was stealing his cattle, the Double K ranch might be in more trouble than she had realized. "Double the night watch," Marcus said, "and make sure everyone's armed." As the men dispersed to their various tasks, Rebecca returned to her work with a heavy heart. She had come to the Double K looking for stability and a fresh start. The last thing she needed was to find herself in the middle of someone else's dangerous problems. But as she began preparing ingredients for the evening meal, Rebecca realized something that surprised her. Despite the broken dishes, the mysterious loose floorboard, and the talk of cattle thieves, she didn't want to leave. For the first time in 2 years, she felt useful and needed. The kitchen was becoming her domain, and the thought of walking away from it made her chest tighten with an emotion she didn't want to examine too closely. At 5:30, she heard the sound of boots on the front porch as the ranch hands came in for supper. Rebecca had prepared beef stew with vegetables, fresh biscuits that were still warm from the oven, and apple pie made from dried fruit she had found in the pantry. The kitchen filled with the rich aromas of a proper meal, and Rebecca felt a flutter of nervous pride. The first man through the door was young, maybe 20, with sandy hair and a shy smile. "Evening, ma'am. I'm Jake Wilson. Rebecca Chen. I'm pleased to meet you, Jake." One by one, the other men introduced themselves. There was Caleb, a quiet man with intelligent eyes who barely spoke above a whisper. Tom, a cheerful fellow with a booming laugh who immediately complimented the smell of her cooking. And finally Pete, who hung back until the others had filled their plates. "Miss Chen," Pete said, his weathered face creasing into a genuine smile. "I haven't smelled cooking this good since my wife passed 3 years ago." "Thank you, Mr. Morrison. I hope it tastes as good as it smells." Marcus entered last, his gray eyes scanning the transformed kitchen with obvious amazement. The long wooden table was set with mismatched but clean dishes, and the warm glow of lamplight made everything look welcoming and homey. "This is," he began, then seemed to lose his words. "Different," Rebecca suggested. "Better. Much better." As the men ate, Rebecca busied herself with cleaning up, but she couldn't help listening to their conversation. They talked about the work that needed to be done before winter, about a sick horse that needed tending, about the cattle that had gone missing. Their voices were relaxed and comfortable, the voices of men who had worked together long enough to become something like family. "Miss Chun," Tom called out. "This stew is the finest thing I've tasted in months. You've got a real gift." Rebecca felt her cheeks warm with pleasure. "Thank you. I'm glad you're enjoying it." "We surely are," Pete added. "Feels good to sit down to a proper meal again." As she served generous slices of apple pie, Rebecca noticed that Marcus ate everything on his plate but remained quieter than the other men. When the others began sharing stories and jokes, he listened with interest but contributed little to the conversation. It was as if he held himself slightly apart, even from men who clearly respected and liked him. After the men had returned to the bunkhouse for the evening, Rebecca found herself alone in the kitchen with Marcus. He lingered over his coffee cup, seeming reluctant to leave. "The men seem happy," Rebecca observed, wiping down the last of the dishes. "They are. I haven't seen them this relaxed in weeks." Marcus looked up at her with something that might have been gratitude. "You've done more than cook a good meal tonight. You've given them back something they were missing." "What's that?" "The feeling that this place is home." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning that neither of them was quite ready to explore. Rebecca felt that flutter in her chest again, the one that suggested her feelings about this job might be more complicated than she had anticipated. "I should let you get some rest," Marcus said, standing to leave. "Morning comes early on a ranch." As he reached the doorway, Rebecca found herself speaking before she could stop herself. "Mr. Kane? Those cattle that went missing? Is the ranch in serious trouble?" Marcus paused, his hand on the doorframe. For a moment, Rebecca thought he might not answer. Then he turned back to her, his expression more open than she had seen it before. "I don't know," he said quietly, "but I'm glad you're here to help us find out." Fire! Fire in the barn! Jake's voice shattered the pre-dawn quiet like a rifle shot, sending Rebecca bolting upright in her bed with her heart hammering against her ribs. She threw on her robe and rushed to the window, where orange flames were already licking at the barn roof like hungry tongues. In the yard below, dark figures ran back and forth, their shouts mixing with the terrified whinnying of horses trapped inside the burning building. Rebecca didn't stop to think. She raced downstairs and out into the chaos, where Marcus was already organizing the men into a bucket brigade from the well to the barn. The heat hit her face like a physical blow, and the smoke made her eyes water, but she could see that they were fighting a losing battle. "The horses!" Pete shouted over the roar of flames. "We've got to get the horses out." Marcus was already running toward the barn door, but Rebecca could see what he couldn't. A burning beam was about to fall right where he would have to pass. Without thinking, she grabbed a bucket of water and threw it, not at the fire, but at Marcus himself, soaking him just as the flaming would crash down exactly where he had been standing. "What the—" Marcus spun around, water dripping from his hair, until he saw the burning beam. His eyes found Rebecca's across the smoky yard, and she saw understanding flash between them. "The side door," Caleb called out. "We can get them out the side." Working together, the men managed to lead all 6 horses to safety before the barn roof collapsed in a shower of sparks and burning wood. They stood in the yard watching their hard work disappear into flame and smoke, their faces grim in the flickering light. "How did it start?" Tom asked, his voice hoarse from breathing smoke. Pete walked around the remains of the barn, examining the ground carefully. When he returned, his expression was dark as a storm cloud. "This wasn't an accident. Found horse tracks leading away from the back of the barn, and I can smell coal oil. Someone set this fire on purpose." Rebecca felt her blood turn cold. First cattle theft, now arson. Someone was definitely trying to drive Marcus off his land, and they were getting more dangerous. "Same people who took the cattle?" Jake asked. "Has to be," Marcus said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "They're trying to run us off our own land." As the sun came up over the smoldering ruins, Rebecca found herself studying each man's face. Pete looked angry but not surprised, as if he had been expecting something like this. Tom seemed shocked and worried. Caleb was quiet as always, but his eyes held a calculating look that made Rebecca wonder what he was thinking. And Jake just looked young and scared. "What do we do now?" Tom asked. "We rebuild," Marcus said firmly, "and we make sure this doesn't happen again." But Rebecca could see the worry lines around his eyes. Rebuilding would cost money the ranch couldn't spare, especially with cattle missing and winter coming. She made a decision that surprised even her. "I have some savings," she said quietly. "Money I've been keeping for emergencies. You can use it for materials." Marcus stared at her. "I can't take your money." "You're not taking it. I'm investing it. This is my home now too." The word home seemed to echo in the morning air. Rebecca hadn't meant to say it, but now that she had, she realized it was true. In just a few days, the Double K had become more important to her than any place she had lived since her husband's death. "Rebecca," Marcus said, and the way he said her name made something flutter in her chest. "You don't understand what you're getting into. These people, whoever they are, they're not going to stop. Then we'll face them together." Pete cleared his throat. "Begging your pardon, but maybe we should talk about this inside. Too many ears out here in the open." They gathered in the kitchen, where Rebecca automatically started making coffee despite the early hour. Her hands needed something to do while her mind processed what was happening. "I've been thinking about those cattle," Pete said, accepting a cup of coffee gratefully. "The way they were taken, the tracks we found, it's professional work. This isn't just some drifters looking for easy money." "What are you saying?" Marcus asked. "I'm saying someone wants this land bad enough to run a careful campaign to get it. They're trying to bleed you dry slowly, make it look like bad luck instead of sabotage." Rebecca poured coffee for the other men, her mind working furiously. Who would want the land? Could be anyone, Tom said. Railroad companies, big cattle outfits, land speculators. Or someone who knows something about this land that we don't, Caleb added quietly. It was the first time Rebecca had heard Caleb contribute much to a conversation, and something in his tone made everyone look at him. What do you mean? Marcus asked. Caleb hesitated, then seemed to make up his mind. I used to work for a surveying company before I came here. Spent a lot of time looking at maps and land records. There's been talk that the railroad might come through this area in the next few years. If that's true, this land could be worth 10 times what you paid for it. The kitchen fell silent except for the gentle bubbling of coffee in the pot. Rebecca could see the pieces falling into place in Marcus's mind. The systematic cattle theft, the barn fire, the pressure to sell. So someone's trying to force you out before you realize what the land is really worth, she said. Marcus nodded grimly. But knowing why doesn't solve the problem of how to stop them. Maybe it does, Rebecca said, an idea forming in her mind. If they want you to think it's bad luck, then they have to be careful not to make it too obvious. That means they can't hit you too hard or too fast. But they can keep bleeding us slowly until we can't afford to stay, Pete pointed out. Rebecca walked to the window and looked out at the smoking ruins of the barn. The sight made her angry. Not just the destruction, but the cowardice of people who would sneak around in the dark destroying other people's hard work. Then we don't give them time for a slow campaign, she said, turning back to the men. We make them show their hand. Marcus studied her face. What are you thinking? I'm thinking that someone who sets fires and steals cattle isn't brave enough for a fair fight. But if we can force them into the open, we might have a chance. That's dangerous talk, Pete warned. These people have already shown they're willing to hurt someone to get what they want. Rebecca met his eyes steadily. Then we'd better make sure we're ready for them. As the men discussed plans for rebuilding and increasing security, Rebecca found herself thinking about that loose floorboard in the kitchen. Whatever Marcus was hiding might be more important than she had realized. If someone was after his land, they might be after whatever was hidden under that board as well. She decided it was time to find out what secrets the Double K ranch was keeping, even if Marcus Kane wasn't ready to share them with her yet. But first, she had breakfast to make for 6 men who had just lost their barn and needed to know that someone still believed in their ability to fight back. As she began pulling ingredients from the pantry, Rebecca realized that she had just made a commitment that went far beyond cooking meals and keeping house. She had chosen sides in a war she didn't fully understand, and there would be no going back. The question was whether Marcus Kane was ready to trust her with the truth about what they were really fighting for. The letter arrived with Tuesday's mail delivery, and the moment Rebecca saw Marcus reading it, she knew their troubles had just gotten worse. His face went pale as old paper, and his hands actually shook as he folded the document and shoved it into his shirt pocket. What is it? Pete asked, noticing Marcus's reaction from across the kitchen where he was enjoying his morning coffee. Nothing important, Marcus said, but his voice sounded like he was choking on dust. Rebecca had been slicing bread for breakfast, but something about Marcus's tone made her set down the knife and turn her full attention to him. In the 3 weeks since she'd arrived at the Double K, she had learned to read the subtle changes in his expressions. This wasn't just worry. This was fear. Mr. Kane, she said carefully, if there's trouble, we should all know about it. Marcus looked at her for a long moment, as if weighing how much truth he could afford to share. Finally, he pulled the letter from his pocket and smoothed it out on the kitchen table. Bank notice, he said quietly. They're calling in my loan. Full payment due in 30 days, or they'll foreclose on the ranch. The kitchen fell silent except for the ticking of the clock on the mantel. Rebecca felt her stomach drop as if she'd stepped off a cliff. 30 days to save the ranch, or everything Marcus had built would be lost. How much? Pete asked, though his voice suggested he already knew the answer wouldn't be good. More than we can raise, even if we sold every head of cattle we have left. Marcus slumped into a chair, looking older than Rebecca had ever seen him. Which we can't do anyway, since half our herd has been stolen. Jake, who had just come in from the morning chores, heard the last part of the conversation. Stolen cattle and now this? Someone's definitely trying to run us off. Rebecca studied the letter over Marcus's shoulder, her mind racing. The bank's letterhead was fancy, with gold lettering that suggested prosperity and importance. But something about the timing bothered her. Who holds your loan? Millbrook Savings and Trust. Mr. Harrison, the bank president, has always been fair to deal with. Marcus rubbed his forehead as if trying to massage away a headache. Though I haven't been able to make my regular payments since we lost the cattle. May I see the letter? Rebecca asked. Marcus handed it to her, and she read it carefully. The language was formal and legal, full of words like default and foreclosure proceedings. But what caught her attention was a small detail at the bottom of the page. This isn't from Mr. Harrison, she said. It's signed by someone named J. McCready, vice president. Pete nearly choked on his coffee. McCready? That's the name of the gang that's been hitting ranches all up and down the territory. The pieces suddenly clicked together in Rebecca's mind like the tumblers of a lock falling into place. What if it's not a coincidence? What if the same people who've been stealing your cattle also have influence at the bank? Marcus stared at her. You think they're working together? I think someone wants this land badly enough to use every weapon they have. Rebecca folded the letter and handed it back to Marcus. The question is, what are we going to do about it? We, Marcus asked. We, Rebecca said firmly. I told you before. This is my home now too. Tom had joined them in the kitchen and overheard the conversation. Even if we could prove the bank and the rustlers are connected, that doesn't solve the problem of the money. 30 days isn't much time. Rebecca was quiet for a moment, thinking furiously. Then she remembered something that might be important. Mr. Kane, that loose floorboard in the kitchen. What's under it? Marcus went very still. What makes you think there's anything under it? Because I've seen hiding places before, and I know what they look like. Rebecca met his eyes steadily. If we're going to fight for this ranch, I need to know everything. Marcus looked around the kitchen at the faces of his men Pete, who had been with him from the beginning, Tom and Jake, who had stayed loyal even when times got hard, Caleb, who rarely spoke but was always dependable. Then his gaze settled on Rebecca, who had appeared in his life like an answer to a prayer he hadn't known he was praying. All right, he said finally, but what I'm about to show you doesn't leave this room. He walked to the loose floorboard Rebecca had noticed and pried it up with his knife. Underneath was a metal box, wrapped in oiled cloth to protect it from moisture. Marcus lifted it out carefully and set it on the kitchen table. My father fought in the Mexican War, he said, opening the box with a small key he wore on a chain around his neck. He was part of a unit that captured a supply train carrying gold to pay Mexican soldiers. The army kept most of it, but the men were allowed to keep some as back pay. Inside the box were gold coins, not many, but enough to make Rebecca's eyes widen. There were also some official-looking papers and what appeared to be a map. This is enough to pay off the bank loan, Pete said, examining the coins. Maybe, Marcus said, but there's a problem. According to these papers, the gold legally belongs to the U.S. Army. If I use it to save the ranch, I'll be guilty of theft. Rebecca studied the documents. The writing was faded but still readable, and it clearly stated that any gold recovered from the supply train was to be turned over to military authorities. How long have you had this? She asked. My father gave it to me on his deathbed 5 years ago, said it was my inheritance, but warned me to be careful about how I used it. Marcus touched one of the coins with his finger. I've been afraid to spend it because I didn't want to end up in prison for stealing from the army. But if you don't use it, you'll lose everything anyway, Tom pointed out. Rebecca was studying the map that had been in the box. It showed the area around the Double K Ranch, but with markings that didn't match any current boundaries or landmarks. What is this map? She asked. Marcus looked uncomfortable. My father said there might be more gold buried somewhere on this land. The supply train was carrying a lot more than what the soldiers kept. But he died before he could tell me exactly where to look. Suddenly, everything made sense to Rebecca. That's why someone wants your land so badly. They know about the gold. But how could they know? Jake asked. Caleb, who had been silent through most of the conversation, finally spoke up. Because someone else has seen that map. Everyone turned to look at him. Caleb rarely said more than a few words at a time, so when he spoke, people listened. What do you mean? Marcus asked. I mean you're not the only person whose father fought in that unit, Caleb said quietly. And you're probably not the only one who inherited gold and a map. The kitchen fell silent as the implications sank in. Someone else knew about the buried treasure, and they were willing to steal cattle, burn barns, and manipulate banks to get their hands on it. So what do we do? Pete asked. Rebecca looked around the table at the faces of the men who had become like family to her in just a few short weeks. She thought about the meals she had cooked in this kitchen, the conversations she had shared, the sense of belonging she had found in this remote place. We fight, she said simply. But first, we need to figure out who we're fighting against. Marcus was staring at the gold coins as if they held the answer to all his problems and all his fears. If we use this gold to pay off the bank, we might save the ranch. But we'll also be admitting that we have it, which means word will get out. And if word gets out about the gold, we'll have every treasure hunter and outlaw in the territory coming after us, Pete added. Rebecca stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the prairie that stretched endlessly toward the horizon. Somewhere out there, enemies were planning their next move. But here in this kitchen, surrounded by people who had become her chosen family, she felt ready for whatever came next. Then we'd better make sure we're ready for them, she said, turning back to face the others. Because I'm not losing my home without a fight. The thunderstorm struck just after midnight, turning the world outside into chaos of wind, rain, and lightning that lit up the prairie like daylight every few seconds. Rebecca had been lying awake listening to the storm when she heard something that made her blood freeze. The sound of horses approaching through the rain. She slipped out of bed and crept to her window, peering through the darkness between lightning flashes. There were at least 6 riders surrounding the house, moving with the careful coordination of men who had done this before. Rebecca grabbed her robe and ran barefoot down the stairs to Marcus's room. She knocked urgently on his door, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Marcus, she whispered urgently. Wake up. There are men outside. The door opened almost instantly, revealing Marcus fully dressed and holding a rifle. I heard them coming. How many? At least 6. They've got the house surrounded. Marcus moved to the front window and peered through a gap in the curtains. Lightning illuminated his face, showing the grim determination Rebecca had come to recognize as his fighting expression. McCrady's gang, he said quietly. They've come for the gold. How do they know we have it? Someone told them. Marcus checked his rifle and made sure it was loaded. The question is who? A voice called out from the yard, barely audible over the storm. Kane, we know you're in there. Come out and let's talk. Marcus looked at Rebecca. Get upstairs and stay away from the windows. This might get ugly. I'm not leaving you to face them alone. Rebecca, these men are killers. If something happens to me, nothing's going to happen to you, she said firmly. We're in this together, remember? Another voice shouted from outside. We don't want to hurt nobody, Kane. Just give us what belongs to us, and we'll ride away peaceful. Marcus moved to the front door but didn't open it. What makes you think I have anything that belongs to you? Your daddy and my daddy rode together in Mexico. Kane, that gold was meant to be shared. Rebecca felt a chill of understanding. Caleb had been right. Marcus wasn't the only one who had inherited a map and knowledge about the hidden treasure. The gold belongs to the army, Marcus called back. Always has. Army don't know it exists. Been 20 years since anyone cared about that supply train. The voice was getting closer to the house. But I care. Been looking for that treasure my whole life. Lightning flashed again, and Rebecca saw a man creeping toward the kitchen door. She grabbed a heavy iron pan from the stove and positioned herself beside the door, her heart pounding so hard she was sure the intruders would hear it. The kitchen door rattled as someone tried the handle. When it didn't open, Rebecca heard the sound of metal against wood. Someone was trying to pick the lock. Marcus appeared in the kitchen doorway, his rifle ready. He saw Rebecca with the pan and nodded approval, then took position on the other side of the door. The lock clicked, and the door swung open slowly. A man's silhouette appeared in the doorway, outlined against the storm-lit sky. He stepped into the kitchen cautiously, a gun in his hand. Rebecca brought the iron pan down on his head with all her strength. The man crumpled to the floor without a sound, his gun clattering across the wooden boards. "Nice work," Marcus whispered, but their small victory was short-lived. The front door exploded inward with a crash of splintering wood, and 3 more men rushed into the house. "Upstairs," Marcus shouted, grabbing Rebecca's hand and pulling her toward the staircase. They made it halfway up before gunshots rang out, splintering the wooden banister beside Rebecca's head. She stumbled but kept climbing, Marcus's hand steady on her back as he returned fire over his shoulder. At the top of the stairs, Marcus pulled her into his bedroom and barricaded the door with a heavy dresser. Outside, they could hear boots on the stairs and voices calling to each other. "There's nowhere to run, Kane. Give us the gold, and maybe we'll let the woman live." Marcus was checking his ammunition. "I've got maybe 10 shots left." Rebecca looked around the room desperately, trying to think of something that might help. Her eyes fell on the window that faced the barn, or what was left of the barn after the fire. "The rope," she said suddenly. "What rope?" "There's a rope hanging from the hayloft in the barn ruins. If we could get to it." Marcus looked out the window, measuring the distance. "It's 20 feet to the ground, and another 30 yards to the barn. In this storm, with men shooting at us, it's better than staying trapped up here." A heavy blow against the bedroom door made the dresser slide several inches. The men downstairs were trying to break in. "They'll have us in another minute," Marcus said grimly. Rebecca made a decision that surprised both of them. She kissed him quickly, a fierce, desperate kiss that tasted like rain and fear and determination. "For luck," she said breathlessly. Marcus stared at her for a moment, then smiled, the first real smile she had seen from him since the troubles began. "In that case," he said, "let's go get that rope." He opened the window, and rain immediately soaked them both. The wind was so strong it threatened to pull them out into the storm, but Marcus went first, lowering himself by his hands before dropping to the muddy ground below. Rebecca followed, her heart in her throat as she dangled from the window sill. The drop seemed endless, but Marcus was there to catch her, his strong arms breaking her fall. They ran through the storm-lashed yard, slipping and sliding in the mud. Behind them, she could hear shouting as the men discovered their escape route. The barn ruins offered some shelter from the wind, and Rebecca could see the rope she had remembered, still hanging from what remained of the hayloft structure. "There," she gasped, pointing through the rain. Marcus looked where she was pointing, then at the approaching lights of the men pursuing them. "We'll never make it to town in this storm." "Then we don't go to town," Rebecca said. "We go to the one place they won't think to look for us." "Where?" Rebecca smiled grimly. "We go find that buried treasure before they do." Marcus stared at her as if she had lost her mind. "In the middle of a thunderstorm? With armed men chasing us? Sometimes the best hiding place is right under your enemy's nose." Another lightning flash revealed their pursuers getting closer. Marcus grabbed the rope and tested its strength. "You realize this is completely crazy," he said. "Do you have a better idea?" Marcus looked at her for a moment, rain streaming down his face, then began climbing the rope. "No," he called down to her, "but I'm starting to think crazy might be exactly what we need." As Rebecca followed him up into the ruins of the barn, she wondered if her plan would save them or get them both killed. But one thing was certain. Sitting in that bedroom waiting for McCrady's gang to break down the door would have meant certain death. At least this way they were fighting back on their own terms. And if they were very lucky, they might just outsmart the men who thought they could steal everything Marcus had worked to build. The shovel hit something hard 3 feet down, and Rebecca's heart nearly stopped beating as the metallic clang echoed through the storm-soaked night. She and Marcus had been digging for 2 hours in the pouring rain, following the faded marks on his father's map to a spot near the old oak tree behind the house. "That's it," Marcus whispered, his voice barely audible over the thunder. "That's got to be it." They scraped mud and water away from what looked like the corner of a metal box, much larger than the one hidden under the kitchen floorboard. Rebecca's hands were raw from gripping the shovel, and her dress was soaked through, but excitement gave her strength as they worked to uncover their discovery. "How much do you think is in there?" she asked, helping Marcus clear the last of the dirt from around the box. "If the stories are true, enough to buy 10 ranches like this one." Marcus wiped rain from his eyes and studied the heavy iron container. "But first we have to get it out of the ground and somewhere safe." A distant shout made them both freeze. Through the rain, they could see lantern lights moving around the house as McCrady's men continued their search. "They're getting closer," Rebecca said, her voice tight with worry. Marcus grabbed one end of the box and motioned for her to take the other. "Help me lift this. We need to get it away from here before they find us." The box was heavier than Rebecca had expected, filled with what felt like solid metal. They managed to carry it between them, stumbling through the muddy darkness toward the creek that ran along the eastern edge of the property. "Where are we taking it?" Rebecca gasped, her arms aching from the weight. "There's a cave about a 1/4 mile downstream. Pete and I used to store supplies there during the worst winter storms." Marcus adjusted his grip on the box. "If we can get there, we can hide this until the storm passes." They followed the creek bank, slipping and sliding on the wet grass. Behind them, the lantern lights were spreading out as McCrady's men expanded their search. Rebecca could hear voices calling to each other through the rain, getting closer with each passing minute. The cave Marcus had mentioned was really more of a deep hollow carved into the creek bank by years of flowing water. It was just large enough for 2 people and a treasure box, and completely hidden from view unless you knew exactly where to look. They crawled inside, dragging the heavy box behind them. The cave was dry and surprisingly warm, protected from the wind and rain by thick stone walls. "Now what?" Rebecca asked, catching her breath. Marcus was examining the box more closely by the light of a match. "Now we open it and see if 20 years of searching was worth it." The box was secured with a heavy padlock that looked like it had been designed to keep out armies. Marcus tried his father's key, but it was too small for this lock. "We need something to break it open," he said, looking around the small cave. Rebecca remembered the small hammer she had seen Marcus use to repair fence posts. "I think I saw a tool in your saddlebag when we came through the barn ruins." "I'll go get it," Marcus said, starting to crawl toward the cave entrance. "No," Rebecca put a hand on his arm. "They're looking for you, not me. I can move more quietly." Before Marcus could argue, she was already crawling out of the cave into the storm. The rain immediately soaked her again, but she kept low and moved carefully along the creek bank toward the barn ruins. Getting to Marcus's saddlebag meant crossing 20 yards of open ground where the searchers might spot her. Rebecca waited until a lightning flash showed her where the lanterns were, then ran as fast as she could through the mud and debris. She found the hammer in the saddlebag, along with a cold chisel that might help break the lock. But as she turned to head back to the cave, a voice spoke from the darkness behind her. Well, what do we have here?" Rebecca spun around to find herself face to face with a man she didn't recognize. He was tall and thin, with cold eyes that seemed to look right through her. In his hand was a gun pointed directly at her chest. "You must be Kane's woman," the man said, stepping closer. "McCrady's been wondering where you two got to." Rebecca's mind raced, trying to think of a way out. The hammer in her hand might work as a weapon, but the man was too far away for her to reach him before he could shoot. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. The man laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Don't play games with me, lady. We know Kane's got that treasure hidden somewhere, and we know you helped him move it." "What treasure?" Rebecca asked, hoping she sounded confused rather than terrified. "The gold from the Mexican supply train. My father was in the same unit as Kane's daddy, and he told me all about it before he died. The man's eyes gleamed with greed. Been looking for it my whole adult life. Rebecca realized this must be McCready himself, the leader of the gang that had been terrorizing ranches throughout the territory. Up close, he looked even more dangerous than she had imagined. Marcus Kane is just a rancher trying to make an honest living, she said. If there was any treasure on this land, don't you think he would have used it to pay his debts? McCready studied her face, looking for signs that she was lying. Maybe he's too scared to use it. Maybe he's afraid the army will come looking for their gold. Rebecca felt a chill that had nothing to do with the rain. McCready knew more about the situation than she had realized. Or maybe, McCready continued, he's been waiting for the right time to dig it up, like tonight, when he thought everyone would be hiding from the storm. Before Rebecca could respond, another voice called out from the darkness. Boss, found fresh digging over by the oak tree. McCready's smile was cold as winter ice. Looks like your boyfriend's been busy tonight. Now you're going to take me to wherever you hid that treasure, or I'm going to start shooting people. Rebecca's mind was working frantically, trying to figure out how to warn Marcus without leading McCready straight to him. The cave was their only advantage. If McCready found it, they would be trapped with nowhere to run. I don't know where he is, she said truthfully. Then you better start looking, McCready replied, grabbing her arm roughly. Because if we don't find Kane and that gold in the next hour, I'm going to burn down what's left of this ranch with everyone in it. As he dragged her back toward the house, Rebecca caught sight of a familiar figure moving through the shadows near the creek. Marcus was following them, staying just out of sight but close enough to act if he got the chance. Rebecca realized that their desperate gamble might still work, but only if she could find a way to turn the tables on McCready before he discovered the cave. The treasure they had found might save the ranch, but first they had to stay alive long enough to use it. And with armed men surrounding them and a killer holding her at gunpoint, staying alive was looking more difficult by the minute. The explosion of gunfire shattered the storm-filled night, and Rebecca threw herself to the ground as bullets whistled over her head like angry hornets. From her position in the mud, she could see muzzle flashes coming from 3 different directions. McCready's men had walked into an ambush. Stay down, Pete's voice boomed from somewhere near the house. We've got you surrounded. Rebecca's heart leaped with hope. Somehow, Pete and the other ranch hands had escaped the initial attack and were fighting back. But McCready still had his gun pressed against her ribs, using her as a human shield. Come out, Kane, McCready shouted over the gunfire. Come out, or I'll put a bullet in your woman. Marcus stepped out from behind the oak tree, his rifle aimed at McCready's head. Let her go, and we'll talk. No talking, McCready snarled. Just give me that gold, and maybe I'll let both of you live. Rebecca could feel McCready's hand shaking with anger and frustration. The careful plan he had spent months putting together was falling apart, and desperate men made dangerous mistakes. The gold belongs to the U.S. Army, Marcus said calmly. It always has. The Army don't care about 20-year-old gold. McCready's voice cracked with fury. They wrote it off as lost years ago. Maybe so, Marcus replied, but it's still not yours to take. Rebecca saw her chance when McCready turned slightly to yell at Marcus. She drove her elbow back into his stomach as hard as she could, breaking free from his grip and rolling away through the mud. McCready doubled over, gasping for breath, and Marcus's rifle spoke once. McCready spun around and fell, his own gun flying into the darkness. But the fight wasn't over. 2 more of McCready's men were still shooting from positions near the barn ruins, and Rebecca could hear boots running through the mud as others tried to flank Pete's position. The cave! Marcus shouted to Rebecca. Get to the cave! She ran for the creek, staying low as bullets zipped through the air around her. Behind her, she could hear Marcus following, stopping occasionally to return fire at their pursuers. They reached the creek bank just as Jake appeared out of the storm, his young face grim with determination. Pete sent me to watch your backs, he said. Tom and Caleb are coming up from the south. Rebecca realized that the ranch hands had coordinated their counterattack, turning McCready's trap into a trap of their own. But there were still too many guns in the darkness, and bullets were flying in all directions. A scream from the direction of the house made them all turn. Through the rain, they could see flames beginning to lick at the kitchen windows. "They're burning the house," Jake shouted. Rebecca felt sick. All her hard work, all the meals she had cooked, all the memories she had built in that kitchen, going up in smoke because of McCrady's greed. "We have to stop them," she said, starting back toward the house. Marcus caught her arm. "It's too dangerous. The whole place could go up." "That's my home." Rebecca pulled away from him. "I'm not letting them destroy it." She ran toward the burning house, her mind focused on saving what she could. But as she got closer, she realized the fire wasn't spreading as fast as it should have been. The storm was helping to contain the flames, and the damage might not be as bad as she had feared. A figure stepped out of the shadows near the kitchen door, one of McCrady's men with a torch in his hand. Rebecca didn't hesitate. She tackled him around the waist, knocking both of them to the ground and sending the torch flying into a puddle where it hissed and went out. The man was bigger and stronger than Rebecca, but she had surprise on her side. She fought like a wildcat, using her fingernails and teeth and the desperation of someone defending her home. Marcus appeared beside her, pulling the man off and ending the fight with one solid punch to the jaw. "Are you hurt?" he asked Rebecca. "I'm fine," she gasped, though her dress was torn and she was covered in mud from head to toe. "Is the fire out?" Marcus looked at the house, where smoke was still rising from the kitchen windows, but the flames seemed to be dying down. "Mostly. We'll need to check inside when this is over." The sound of gunfire was getting less frequent, suggesting that the battle was winding down. Pete's voice called out from the darkness. "That's the last of them. Everyone all right?" "We're here," Marcus called back. "Rebecca's safe." As the ranch hands gathered in the yard, Rebecca counted heads to make sure everyone had survived the fight. Pete had a bandage around his left arm, and Tom was limping slightly, but no one had been seriously hurt. "What about McCrady?" she asked. "He's alive, but he won't be causing any more trouble," Pete said grimly. "We've got him and 3 of his men tied up in the bunkhouse. The others ran off when they realized they were outnumbered." Rebecca looked at the damaged house, the ruined barn, and the muddy battlefield that had been her peaceful home just a few hours earlier. Everything seemed different now, as if the violence had changed the very nature of the place. "The treasure," she said suddenly, remembering the heavy box they had hidden in the cave. "We need to get it somewhere safe." Marcus nodded. "Pete, can you and the boys keep watch while Rebecca and I take care of something?" Pete studied Marcus's face for a moment, then nodded. "Take all the time you need. We'll handle things here." As they walked back toward the creek, Rebecca felt Marcus take her hand. His palm was warm and solid, an anchor in a world that had suddenly become uncertain and dangerous. "That was the bravest thing I've ever seen," he said quietly. "Running into a burning building to save your home." "It's not just my home," Rebecca replied, squeezing his hand. "It's our home." The word, "our," seemed to hang in the air between them, heavy with meaning and possibility. Rebecca realized that somewhere in the midst of all the danger and chaos, something fundamental had changed between them. They weren't just employer and employee anymore. They weren't even just friends facing a common threat. They had become something deeper, something that might survive whatever challenges lay ahead. But first, they had to figure out what to do with a box full of stolen army gold and a ranch that had been nearly destroyed by men who would kill for treasure. The storm was finally beginning to clear, and through the breaking clouds, Rebecca could see the first hint of dawn on the eastern horizon. A new day was coming, and with it, decisions that would determine the fate of the Double K Ranch and everyone who called it home. The gold coins spilled across the kitchen table like fallen stars, each one catching the morning light that streamed through the newly repaired windows. Rebecca had never seen so much wealth in one place, hundreds of $20 gold pieces that represented more money than most people would see in a lifetime. "Sweet mother of pearl," Pete whispered, running his fingers through the treasure they had pulled from the cave at dawn. "There's got to be $50,000 here." Marcus sat heavily in his chair, staring at the fortune that could solve all their problems or create entirely new ones. More than enough to pay off the bank and rebuild the ranch. But it's still Army gold, Rebecca said quietly, voicing the concern that hung over them like a storm cloud. Using it would make us thieves. Jake picked up one of the coins and examined it closely. These are dated 1847. Been sitting in that box for 20 years. Does the Army even remember they exist? The Army never forgets, Tom said grimly. My brother served 10 years, and he said they keep records of every penny that goes missing. Rebecca watched Marcus's face as he wrestled with the decision. She could see the war going on behind his eyes, the desperate need to save his ranch fighting against the honor that wouldn't let him steal, even from people who might never notice the loss. There might be another way, Caleb said from his position by the window where he was keeping watch for more trouble. What if we don't keep the gold? Everyone turned to look at him. Caleb rarely spoke up during important discussions, so when he did, people listened. What do you mean? Marcus asked. I mean, what if we turn it in to the authorities, but ask for a reward? Caleb moved away from the window and joined them at the table. The Army pays rewards for recovered stolen property, usually 10% of the value. Rebecca felt a flutter of hope. 10% of $50,000 would be $5,000. That's not enough to pay off the bank. But it would be a start. And it would be honest money, Marcus said, his voice gaining strength. Money we earned instead of stole. Pete stroked his mustache thoughtfully. But where do we find an Army officer out here? Nearest fort is 3 days' ride. Actually, Jake said, there's a cavalry patrol that comes through Millbrook every month. They're due in tomorrow, according to Mr. Henley. Rebecca saw the plan forming in Marcus's mind. We could take the gold to town, turn it over to the cavalry, and request a reward. If they agree, we use that money to make a payment to the bank and ask for more time. And if they don't agree to a reward? Tom asked. Marcus looked around the table at the faces of his friends. People who had risked their lives to defend the ranch and were now helping him figure out how to save it. Then we'll find another way, but at least we'll sleep well at night knowing we did the right thing. Rebecca felt a warm rush of pride. This was the man she had fallen in love with, someone who would choose honor over easy money, even when his entire future was at stake. There's one more problem, Pete said. McCready and his boys are locked up in the bunkhouse, but they're not going to stay quiet about the gold. Word's going to get out. Let it, Marcus said firmly. Once the Army has their gold back, it won't matter who knows about it. Rebecca stood up and began gathering the coins back into their box. Then we'd better get to town before McCready starts talking to the wrong people. As they prepared for the trip to Millbrook, Rebecca couldn't help but think about how much had changed since she first arrived at the Double K. She had come looking for a job cooking for ranch hands, but she had found something much more valuable, a home, a family, and a love that was strong enough to choose what was right over what was easy. The ride to town was tense, with everyone watching for signs of more trouble. The box of gold was hidden under a pile of supplies in the back of the wagon, but Rebecca felt like everyone who saw them must know what they were carrying. Millbrook looked the same as always, a small frontier town where the biggest excitement was usually the arrival of the weekly mail. But today, the presence of Army uniforms outside the general store made Rebecca's heart beat faster. There's the cavalry patrol, Marcus said, pointing to the soldiers examining their horses near the store. Looks like our timing is perfect. Rebecca climbed down from the wagon, her legs shaky from nerves and the long ride. Everything they had worked for, everything they hoped to build together, depended on the next few minutes. The cavalry officer was a young lieutenant with serious eyes and a precise manner of speaking. When Marcus explained about finding the buried treasure, the lieutenant listened carefully and asked detailed questions about how they had discovered it. You're saying you found a box of 20-year-old Army gold and you want to return it? The lieutenant asked, as if he couldn't quite believe what he was hearing. Yes, sir, Marcus replied, but we were hoping the Army might see fit to pay a reward for its recovery. The lieutenant examined the coins and the official papers that had been buried with them. Rebecca held her breath as he read through the documents, looking for any sign of what his decision might be. "This is definitely Army property," he said finally. These coins were reported stolen from a supply train in 1847. The Army has been looking for them ever since. Rebecca's heart sank. It sounded like the lieutenant was going to take the gold and send them away empty-handed. However, the lieutenant continued, "Army regulations do provide for rewards in cases like this. The fact that you brought this gold to us voluntarily, when you could have kept it for yourselves, shows remarkable honesty." "What kind of reward?" Pete asked bluntly. The lieutenant smiled for the first time since they had met him. 20% of the recovered value is standard for voluntary return of stolen Army property. That would be $10,000. Rebecca felt her knees go weak. $10,000 was more than twice what they needed to pay off the bank loan. It was enough to rebuild the barn, buy new cattle, and secure the ranch's future. "There is one condition," the lieutenant added. "The Army will want to investigate the original theft. We'll need statements from all of you about how you found the gold and what you know about the men who attacked your ranch." "McCready and his gang are tied up back at the ranch," Marcus said. "You're welcome to question them." As they completed the paperwork and arrangements for the reward money, Rebecca felt a weight lifting from her shoulders. For the first time since arriving at the Double K, the future looked bright and secure. But the biggest reward wasn't the money. It was the look of pride and love in Marcus's eyes when he realized that doing the right thing had saved everything he cared about. "Ready to go home?" he asked, offering her his arm as they walked back to the wagon. Rebecca looked at the man who had become her partner in every sense of the word, then at the prairie that stretched endlessly toward the horizon where their ranch waited. "Yes," she said, taking his arm and feeling the solid strength of it under her hand. "Let's go home." The wedding dress was simple but beautiful, made from soft blue fabric that Rebecca had found in Henley's store and sewn by her own hands during the long winter evenings. As she stood in front of the mirror in her room at the Double K, she barely recognized the woman looking back at her. 6 months had passed since the night of the storm and the treasure. 6 months of rebuilding, healing, and discovering that love could grow even stronger when it was tested by danger and hardship. The bank loan had been paid in full, the barn had been rebuilt bigger and better than before, and new cattle grazed peacefully in pastures that were now protected by fences and faithful ranch hands. "You look beautiful," Pete said from the doorway, dressed in his best suit with his silver hair combed back neat and proper. "Marcus is one lucky man." Rebecca smiled at the man who had become like a father to her. "Thank you, Pete. Is everyone ready?" "The whole territory's turned out for this wedding," Pete chuckled. "Got folks here from ranches 50 miles away. You and Marcus have become quite the famous couple." The story of their treasure discovery and their decision to return the gold to the Army had spread throughout Nebraska Territory. Some people called them heroes, others called them fools, but everyone agreed they were honest folks worth knowing. Rebecca took one last look around the room that had been her home for almost a year. Tomorrow, she would be moving into the larger bedroom down the hall that she would share with her husband. The thought made her stomach flutter with excitement and nervousness. "Time to go," Pete said, offering her his arm. "Can't keep the preacher waiting." They walked downstairs together, past the kitchen where she had cooked thousands of meals and discovered that food really was a language of love. Through the front door, where she could see the yard filled with neighbors, friends, and even some strangers who had come to witness the wedding of the couple who had found treasure and given it back. Marcus stood under an arch of prairie flowers near the rebuilt barn, looking handsome in a new black suit. When he saw her walking toward him, his face lit up with a smile that made Rebecca's heart skip like a stone across water. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. Reverend Johnson spoke about love, commitment, and the courage it took to build a life together on the frontier. Rebecca barely heard the words. She was too busy looking into Marcus's eyes and marveling at how much her life had changed since that morning she stepped off the stagecoach in Millbrook. "Do you, Rebecca Chen, take this man to be your husband, in good times and bad, in sickness and health, for richer or poorer, as long as you both shall live?" "I do," Rebecca said, her voice clear and strong. "Do you, Marcus Kane, take this woman to be your wife, in good times and bad, in sickness and health, for richer or poorer, as long as you both shall live? I do, Marcus replied, his storm-gray eyes never leaving her face. Then by the power vested in me by the territory of Nebraska, I pronounce you husband and wife. Marcus, you may kiss your bride. The kiss was gentle and sweet, full of promise for all the tomorrows they would share. Around them, the crowd cheered and applauded, but Rebecca only heard the beating of her own heart and the whispered words Marcus spoke against her ear. Welcome home, Mrs. Kane. The celebration that followed lasted until well after sunset. There was music and dancing, enough food to feed a small army, and stories that would be told around frontier hearths for years to come. Rebecca danced with Marcus, with Pete, with Jake and Tom and Caleb, and with neighbors who had become friends during the long months of rebuilding. As the evening wound down and the guests began to head home, Rebecca found herself standing on the porch with Marcus, looking out at the land that was now truly theirs. The moon was full, casting silver light across the prairie grass that moved like ocean waves in the gentle breeze. Do you ever regret it? Marcus asked, his arm around her waist. Giving up the gold, I mean. Rebecca leaned into his embrace, feeling the solid strength of him and the steady beat of his heart. Never. We have something much more valuable than gold. What's that? We have each other. We have this land. We have friends who would risk their lives for us. Rebecca turned in his arms to face him. We have a future built on honest work and choices we can be proud of. Marcus kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. I love you, Rebecca Kane. I love you too, Marcus Kane. As they stood together in the moonlight, Rebecca thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. She had answered a simple advertisement for a ranch cook, looking for nothing more than steady work and a place to belong. Instead, she had found a love that was deeper than any treasure buried in the ground. The Double K ranch stretched around them, peaceful and secure under the stars. In the distance, cattle grazed quietly in moonlit pastures. The rebuilt barn stood strong and proud, ready to shelter animals through whatever storms might come. And inside the house, the kitchen waited for tomorrow's meals that would nourish not just bodies, but the sense of family and home that Rebecca had helped create. Some people spent their whole lives searching for treasure, but Rebecca knew she had already found the greatest treasure of all. She had found a place where she belonged, work that fulfilled her, and a love that would last as long as the prairie grass grew and the Nebraska wind blew free. Ready to go inside, Mrs. Kane? Marcus asked, his voice warm with love and laughter. Rebecca took one last look at the star-filled sky, then smiled at the man who had become her partner in all things. Ready, Mr. Kane. Let's go home. Hand in hand, they walked into their house, into their future, into the life they had built together, one meal, one choice, one act of courage at a time. The door closed behind them, but their story was just beginning. A story of love, hope, and the kind of happiness that comes from knowing you're exactly where you're meant to be. Outside, the prairie wind whispered through the grass, carrying the scent of growing things and the promise of seasons yet to come. The Double K ranch slept peacefully under the stars, home to two people who had learned that the best treasures are the ones you create with your own hands and share with the ones you love.